It's like all change.
Then they don't have round skew.
This one.
They do not have a round skew.
So we will not do that. We're not gonna try to figure out that. That'll be crazy. But I think we'll have some extra pens that we can sell. We'll send out a check to the
Yeah.
It's a donor one, right?
Okay. Magen David Adom. Magen David Adom. Magen David Adom. Magen David is Magen David. The Adom means red,
Ah,
Like the red cross.
but it's not. It's the red star. The red Magen David.
Field.
Okay. Good evening, everyone that's on Zoom and local. Welcome back to the third lesson of the world of Kabbalah. We are already on our way towards becoming trained Jewish mystics, and tonight, we began our course going through. You know what? Tonight we're going to start with angels. Although we had a class in Supernatural, we had a class about angels. Tonight we're not going to be talking about the purpose of angels or how they are connected to our connection to God, etc. But they do loom large in our prayers. We have a whole section in the daily prayer discussing angels, and one of the verses that many people are familiar with, because it's the only time in the prayer book that we repeat a word 3 times, is Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. In the shul, people jump up when they say, Holy, Holy, Holy. And this verse comes from a vision from the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu. And now most people, when they hear prophet, they hear someone that tells the future of the Jewish people. But if you learn Maimonides, a prophet really is someone who lives a life divorced from materialism and becomes so spiritual that he receives divine information through angels and through spiritual visions, etc. That's what a prophet really is. It happens to be God transmits messages through the prophet that he wants to convey to the Jewish people. So in Isaiah, we have many, many visions where many mystical Kabbalistic ideas come from. But let's look in text 1. This is from Isaiah. Seraphim, and we'll soon speak about what that word means. It's a name for angels. Stood above to serve him. 6 wings to each one. And one called to the other and exclaimed, Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The entire earth is full of his glory. Okay, so what is the meaning of these words? Why are they significant enough that they become part of our daily prayer? By the way, we say it twice a day in our personal prayer. If you daven with a minyan in a shul, you will say it 4 times a day. That's how prominent it is in our service. So why? What is so significant about these words that makes it so prominent? And why are the angels or these angels called seraphim? By the way, does anyone know what the Hebrew word seraphim means, or the root of the word? We'll see it soon in the text. It means to be burned. Okay, why are they called seraphim? And what is the meaning of wings? Now, obviously, we mentioned this in the last couple of weeks. If angels are spiritual in nature, they're not going to have wings. So what does it mean, wings, spiritually? And by the way, the Torah does describe a number of times angels coming down into this world in physical form, and nowhere in those descriptions does it speak about wings. Okay, so anytime there's an angel that comes down into this world, there's no mention of wings. But when there's description of angels the way they are in heaven, then we do speak about wings. So what are these spiritual wings that are present in this vision of Isaiah. So to unlock this mysterious passage, we are going to pull out our maps and reorient ourselves with where we're holding. Generally, what we've learned so far can be broken down into three general categories. In the first lesson, we learned about Biyah, right? The three worlds that are created on the bottom left of the front side of the map. These are spiritual states of existence, but they feature sort of an independent sense of self. Then last week we went up and we spoke about the world of Atzilus and the 10 Sefirot, the 10 attributes that are in the world of Atzilus. Now, we did learn last week that although the 10 Sefirot are godly, right? Remember, we spoke about godliness. They're not yet, they do have a form, right? There's 10, not 11, and not 9. It's not God as he is simple, without form or a context, so to speak, okay? So we mentioned that, but that is what we are going to talk about this week, Keter. We're going to explore this third paragraph, and we'll soon see what Keter means and other names that we will use for this category. On the map, it's generally the orange, which is the whole top, but today we're going to do lesson 3, which on the left side you see is Keter, and on the right side in the person, it's pleasure and desire, okay? Now, as with all levels in this course, we are going to strive to understand things the way they are up there, but we're also going to discover how they play out down here in our personal lives. So, as we continue to build our Kabbalah vocabulary, we need to become familiar with some appropriate terms regarding this state of godliness before Atzilut. Okay, so in text 2, we have before Atzilut was emanated and before the creations were created, a simple divine light filled all of reality. It had no aspect of beginning or end. It is called Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Now, so here we're talking about, the first thing we recognize is we're talking about infinite, and the metaphor or the tool that the Kabbalists chose to express the infinite was with light, not energy, and not any other type of term. We use the term light. Now, we did talk a little bit about this last week, but today we're going to expand about it a little more. Now, here you have it in your maps. You'll see Or Ein Sof, sort of at the top. It's but it's in yellow because it really is a general name of the whole yellow section, the whole top section, lessons 3, 4, and 5, which is infinite, divine infinity. If you look on the side of the map, you'll see that the green is finite and the yellow is infinite. So the blue at the bottom is independence. That's creation, something that was already created. The green is emanation. So it's divine, but it's finite. And today we're going to start the next 3 weeks talking about the infinite. The last week number 6 is totally a whole different world. But the next 3 weeks we're going to be talking about the infinite. Now, so why do we use light? Last week we discussed a little bit that they use the term light because light comes from somewhere, right? So it's not God's essence. Light has a source where it comes from. So we're not yet talking about God's essence. So lessons 3, 4, and 5, the infinite light, this is all still godliness. It's the infinite part of godliness, but it's not God. Again, because light implies that there is a source, there's a luminary, there's a place where this light comes from. Yeah. So on the one hand, you have there's that if you see light, you know that the light comes from somewhere, the light has a source. But at the same time, as we discussed last week, light is very much connected to its source, to an extreme. Okay, so like the other term that sometimes is used when describing godliness is a flow, a divine flow. Okay, so imagine rain. Okay, the clouds come and it rains, then the clouds leave. What happens to the rain? It stops raining, but the rain is still there. The ground is still wet. But what happens when you have a sun? You have light, right? What happens when the sun dips behind the horizon? What happens? There's no light. The light isn't preserved anywhere, right? You know, they tell the story of Kim Jong-un. Right?
Yeah.
Anyhow, he once gathered together his advisors, and he said, you know, we have to beat the West in something. Come up with something that we're going to do to outdo the West. So they come back a few days later, and each one presents his ideas, and the one that wins is the guy that says, we are going to land the first people on the sun. We're going to take the first ship to the sun. So one of the ministers that didn't win comes to Kim afterwards, and he says, I don't understand. You're not going to be able to get to the sun because it's so hot. You're not going to be able to get close. And he thought about it, and he realized it's a problem. So he called the advisor that won, and he said, what are you going to do about the fact that the sun is too hot? So the advisor says, no, I thought about that already. We're going to do it. Oh, I see. We're going to do it at night. So the other one says, yeah, but everyone knows that at night there's no sun. How are you going to get there? So you have this idea where there's a sun is the luminary. If the sun stops shining, the light doesn't stick around. Even energy, electricity, right? You can have, when you turn off the switch, sometimes you can have some electricity that sticks around a little bit because it's more flow type. It's something more tangible. It's something more disconnected from the source. But light, the minute the luminary turns off, I'm assuming you're not light years away from the, right? So if you're, although I think for light, there is no time. But so if you're light years away, even after the light shuts off, you'll still get the light. But assuming you're dealing with the light that we relate to, once you turn off the light, there's no light anymore. So we have both sides here. We have the fact that the light indicates there is a luminary. It is not the source, but at the same time, it's very much connected to its source, inseparable. So that's why the rabbis refer to godliness as Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Okay, so that's the first term we have for tonight's lesson, Or Ein Sof, infinite light.
What does soap mean by itself?
End. It's a light that has no end. Why do we say it has no end? Why don't we say infinite light? Because it has a beginning. So it's not true infinity. The beginning is the light bulb, is the source, is God. So there is a beginning. Usually true infinity has no beginning or end. If it had a beginning, it wouldn't be truly infinite. This is infinite light. So it has both elements. It's infinite because it represents, and it's an extension from God, so therefore it's infinite, but it's light. In other words, it's an expression of, it's not the thing itself. Okay, there is another common term. We're not going to get too much into it, but I do want to mention it, and that's in text 3. This is from the Zohar, and this is, the Zohar says, he encompasses all worlds and he fills all worlds. Okay, he fills all worlds refers to God as he is already in Atzilut, in the 10 attributes. And then the way he comes down into Biyah. This fills all the worlds means that he's present. When you look around, you see him. You see God's kindness. You see God's wisdom. When you look at the way the world works, study physics, you see God's wisdom. Look at the fact that Jews are still around, you see God's kindness, right? You see the way God fills the world. Those are God, that is God, the way he's in his attributes, godliness. But then there's also the way, and that was lessons 1 and 2. Lessons 1 and 2 is the way God fills the world, the way we relate to it, the way we can sort of have a relationship with it. But then there's the way God transcends all of creation. And the term that's used is sovev kol ha'amim, which means he encompasses all the worlds. Sovev means to surround. Now remember, we're not talking physical here. We don't mean surrounded, that he's not in the world, he's around it. It means he's above it. He doesn't deal with the nitty-gritty. Doesn't get caught up in the details. That's mimalei kol ha'amim, the part of God that fills the worlds. But God, the way he surrounds the worlds, he encompasses the worlds. That is, and this is really what we're going to start focusing on today. Last 2 lessons were the way God either creates worlds or comes into the emanation, the world of Atzilus, the way he prepares to create worlds. Today we're going to talk about the way Hashem encompasses all the world. So this is another term that also refers to Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, is also the level of God that encompasses all the worlds. Sovev kol ha'amim. Sovev in Hebrew means to surround. The other Hebrew term is mimalei kol ha'amim. So you see, both of them are the same. Kol ha'amim means all the worlds. Mimalei means to fill. And then sovev means to surround. So it's 3 words. The last 2 words are the same. Kol ha'amim, all the worlds. Either sovev, and many times if you study Hasidus or Kabbalah, you will see just the terms sovev and mimalei. It won't say sovev kol ha'amim or mimalei kol ha'amim. Not always. Sometimes it'll just be referred to as sovev and mimalei. Okay. So now, what do you use? Huh? Okay. So now we will understand why the Srafim, okay, why the Srafim are called, why the angels are called burned. Yeah. Text 4. Page 78. The lofty angels of Bria are called Seraphim from the word to burn, due to their flaming passion to gaze at the king's glory. Excuse me, thank you. At Sovev Kol Ha'amim, the state of godliness that encompasses all worlds, which is separate and transcendent, Kadosh. That is why they proclaim Kadosh. Now, the Seraphim, the angels, are in Bria. Bria is in Bia, in the last 3 worlds, it's the first created world, Bria. Bria is a creation, but it's the first thing that God created. So it's very close to God, which means that it understands, appreciates, feels close to God. When is a person filled with a burning desire? When do you have a desire that like sort of consumes you, that you call a burning desire?
Yom Kippur in the high holidays, right?
But what triggers a burning desire that like eats you up alive? When you close and can't have it. In other words, you feel like it's inaccessible. But it would seem that angels and Bria aren't close enough. They couldn't. They're independent, but they're the highest level of independent that they don't really feel their independence, which means they do appreciate godliness. So why are they? We should be burned with a desire for God. Why are they burned? They shouldn't be burned. They're close enough that they could a little bit appreciate it. So he explains that they're not burned by mimale kol almin, by the level of God that is embedded within the world. Because it's true, they're very close to it and they feel very much a part of it. But they recognize, right? What is the more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. So the closer you are to mimale kol almin, the more you realize this isn't all that's there. There's a lot more there. Remember the parable with Newton coming to the 6th grade classroom and trying to explain them something? Let's say you have a kid that's really brilliant in the 6th grade, and he does get a little bit that what Newton's saying, really, this might uncover something very deep. What is his immediate reaction going to be? I'm sure you've all experienced it in some way or in a shape or form in your lives when you see something that you realize there's something there. What is the trigger within you? But you want to know more. You want to ask more questions. Now, what happens when you find out everything there is to know? Do you stop wanting to? So now you're just going to leave Newton alone? What are you going to want to know next? You're going to want to learn more about Newton. Let's take a different example. Let's say there's an actor that plays a hero of yours. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, some actor that plays Abraham Lincoln in a movie. Okay, and then you get to meet this person. Are you only going to want them to speak in the Abraham Lincoln voice or wear that costume? Are you only going to be interested in his portrayal of Abraham Lincoln? Or are you going to start asking personal questions? You want to know, where did he come from? How did he get to where he got to? How was he able to put on a persona that's not his own? You're going to want to know a lot about the person personally. The same thing here. The angels, they recognize that what they're being told about God is only about God. And that automatically triggers within them a passionate desire to learn more about God. And this burns them up. This eats them up alive. And that's why they're called Srafim. And that's why they say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And it says they have wings, 6 wings. They're going up and up and up and up because they're constantly trying to get higher and higher and higher. Even when we say this in the shul, we go up and down, right? We're mimicking sort of the desire of the angels being portrayed in this expression of theirs, that they want to go higher and higher. Yes.
We were saying about an actor, Bradley Cooper is playing Leonard Bernstein, and he was sitting with the family at CBS this morning, this past Sunday, and he was crying because he missed him, even though he had never met him.
Yeah.
And that was on CBS this morning. You can see it on YouTube. But they were sitting with the family, and they were all missing him, and they respected that as because he'd spent 6 years learning to be him.
Can you imagine what would happen if he'd be given the opportunity to actually meet him? He wouldn't say, "Oh, I know everything there is to know about him. I don't need to see him in person." Right? You want to, the more you know about the person, the more you want to see them and learn more about them, etc. So now this hopefully will help us understand something important. You could have come the last 2 lessons and most people, when they journey towards God, they journey towards spirituality, towards religion. Usually it starts from, they look out like Abraham and they say, there must be a God. There must be a higher power. There must be something. And looking at the world, in other words, encountering God in the world leads them to God. That's mimale kol almin. The first thing you encounter on your way to spirit to God is mimale kol almin, usually. Sometimes people are thrust into it. People that were faced with, you hear stories of people that survived or that we know what happened. Secular people that were faced with being killed because they were Jewish on Simchas Torah, and they screamed out Shema Yisrael. That's not encountering God the way he is in the world. That's encountering Sovev Kol Omin. But most people, when you journey towards God, you encounter God the way he is within the world. Yeah? In other words, we either see God as the creator, but when we do, what should that trigger within us? It should trigger within us a desire to know God as he is, above being a creator. Yeah. None of us like to be the man or woman in the relationship who insists that their fiance, spouse, partner matters to them to the extent that they benefit. In other words, if someone asks you to describe your spouse or your fiance, you wouldn't just say everything she gives to you. So when we think about God, the way God is manifests in this world and relates to us, that's saying everything about God that we want to know, that we care about because it benefits us. But what about God himself? You don't care about that? You don't care about your spouse before their past, before they grew up and matured, even though it may not influence anything about their lives today. It doesn't interest you because it's them. If we're in a relationship, the same way we want God to interest himself in us, we should interest ourselves in God. On page 80, 81, you have here the 13 attributes of mercy. We're not going to go through it now. It's beyond the scope of our class, but you could look at it later. Might be interesting. It will be interesting. Yes.
Small question.
Yes.
In the source of mercy in the paragraph, it says the world is meaning wisdom, but on the page here it says creativity.
No, which side are you looking at?
I'm looking at the source of mercy is the paragraph.
No, I know that, but
Which side? You're looking at the image.
yeah, but
this image here.
But that's because you are looking at the way it's in the person. Unfortunately, it's not in. We're going to see Chachma later in the class the way it is in God. On the left side, you don't have the translation. It translates a little different when we're talking about. This is the way it's expressed. It's not a translation of the word Chachma. Yeah. Knowledge or wisdom. We're going to talk about it later.
Creatively?
No, we'll talk about it. Hopefully, we'll get there.
But wisdom is it.
Yeah. Okay. So we explained one Jewish prayer, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. I want to take you to a different Jewish prayer. This one everyone is familiar with. A very popular Jewish song. Oseh Shalom Bimromav. May he who makes peace in his heavens make peace for us and all of Israel, and say, Amen. Okay. We understand the request that God make peace for us and all of Israel. That we get. That's a request. But what does it mean when we say, he who makes peace in his heavens? Who exactly is fighting up there that God needs to make peace between them? Right? We're saying we're going to God to make peace between us because he's experienced. Where does he get his experience from making peace? In the heavens. What type of peace does God make in the heavens? So in the previous lesson, we learned about the world of Atzilus and the 10 Sefirot, the 10 attributes within the world. And we zeroed in on the 3 general columns. The right, which is represented by Chesed, which is this one, and then the left, Gevura. Later, we'll get to the top 3. But last week, we started Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet, right? Kindness as strength and beauty. In other words, we have different attributes, and we discussed how every person, although we have all 10, really has one that he excels in. But if you look at the map, and I'll put it up on the screen, you'll see there's actually connection points between all 10. And if you count, there are 22 connection points between the 10 Sefirot. Actually, you might find 23, but take my word for it, there's 22 connection points. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, plus 10. So 22 connection points plus the 10 is 32. And the Zohar speaks about the 32 veins or channels of wisdom. Okay, that's Kabbalah. That we're not going to explain that today. But the point is that we don't suffice with having 3 separate columns and 10 separate entities. The purpose of Atzilus is to interconnect all of them together. So each one of these 10 is really made up of all other 10, but they have a closer connection to the ones that are closer to them. The further you go, the further the connection, but at the same time, there is a connection. The word for this is hiskalalut or hitkalalut, which means like an intertwining, an incorporation is the way they translate it here, but it means sort of to interconnect. Now, you would think that if someone is uniquely, specifically kind, they are not going to be very strong in discipline. That's against their nature. So God has to employ a peace process to make peace between these 10 conflicting attributes so that they can all not only live in peace, but interconnect with each other. Let's look at text 7, a very interesting parable from the Alter Rebbe. The synthesis of the 10 Sefirot, especially those that are opposites, such as Chesed and Gevura, is made possible through the agency of supernal light. This is the infinite light that transcends the characteristics of the Sefirot. Upon sensing the supernal light, the Sefirot experience bittul. Remember what bittul means? Submission. They relinquish their configuration and synthesize with each other. This is going to be very, very important in our own lives, as we'll soon see. But here he gives another metaphor. Consider the example of 2 government ministers who hopelessly oppose each other. Okay, let's say one's the finance minister and one is the defense minister. The defense minister, he's spending, he doesn't bring in any money. The finance minister wants to make sure there's enough money in the coffers to take care of the country. So there's a conflict, right? The finance minister wants to save as much money as possible. The defense minister wants to spend as much money as possible. And they're both doing it to do their jobs. But there's an essential conflict between the two. When they must appear together before the king, they remain who they are with their preferences, but find themselves working with the opposing viewpoint to reach a required consensus. This is a consequence of their state of bittul that results from their overwhelming trepidation and awe of the king's majesty, whose rank by far transcends their own. This is very difficult to understand today because today the only way the finance minister and the defense minister can work together is if they're 100% altruistic about their jobs. If their only purpose in their job is to benefit the country, they will figure out a way to benefit the country. Today, most people don't have that much altruism. But back in the day when you worked for the king, you had no choice. You could be the biggest egotistical person in the world. When you stood in front of the king, because the king, the aura and the power of the king was so immense, you became automatically nullified. You lost your independence in front of the king, and you were able to work together with your opponent to bring the outcome that the king wanted. Similarly, the opposite forces of Chesed and Gevura and Atzilut can synthesize due to the illumination of God's infinite light or Ein Sof. Okay, so the 10 attributes, they're 10 separate attributes. Next week, we'll talk about what happens when they don't have the synthesis. What happens when everything crashes. That we're going to talk about next week. But because they are aware of the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, and they're overwhelmed by it, so even though Gevura opposes Chesed, they could still figure out a way to work together. By the way, you can have this in a teacher-student relationship as well. You can have sometimes a teacher that will tell the students one thing, then I'll tell the students something else, and the students see a blatant contradiction between the two pieces of information the teacher gave the students. This happens all the time. It can happen in mathematics, it can happen in physics, it can happen in science, it can happen anywhere. Where you have, at its most basic level, you have two opposing pieces of information, and in order to understand how they can both live together, you have to have a more advanced knowledge of the subject, and then you could see how they fit together. So here you have, you look at the 10 attributes, the way they come into this world, the way they manifest as individual attributes, they look like they can't fit together. But when you uncover the true depth of the teacher, then you see how ultimately they were all meant to work together. But you have to see the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, to be overwhelmed by it enough to see how you can work with your opponent and with someone who is intrinsically opposite of you. Well, not intrinsically, but seemingly intrinsically opposite from you. So paradoxically, this is I don't know if you remember the word pshitut, simplicity of the Or Ein Sof, that can take 10 separate entities and make them work together, even though it itself is simplicity, is pashut, simple. And this is what it means. God makes peace in the heavens, right? God isn't made up of these two faculties. God supersedes them. God is infinite light. But when God's presence is revealed, he can make peace between anything that contradicts each other, because they become submitted under this great infinite light. And this explains why on the map, if you look at the map, the Tiferet, remember what's Tiferet? Tiferet is beauty that brings together Chesed and Gevura, kindness and strength. How does it have the power to bring these two together? Because it's in the middle column. The middle column starts with Keter, the crown, right? Keter is a crown. That's the above. It's above the head. It's not. It's simplicity. Once you get into the brain, that's where you start getting levels, and there's 3 different parts of the brain that we're going to talk about later. There, it's already part of the 10 attributes. The crown rests above the human being, above Atzilut. This is the infinite light. And that's why it's called a keter, a crown, that's why we're Tiferet, beauty, has the ability to fuse two opposites together, because it has this middle direct line to the infinite light. So far, so good? Makes sense? This dynamic plays out in our lives in marriage, in the institution of marriage. I don't mean marriage, two people decide they want to, two people decide they want to live together, and financially it's better, it's more beneficial to get married. The institution of marriage, from a religious perspective, from a Jewish perspective. Ginsburg, he was convinced his wife was going deaf, but she refused to go to the audiologist to see. So she asked the doctor, how can she tell, how deaf? He asked the doctor, how can he tell how deaf his wife is, and if what they need to do? So he gave her a simple test. He said, go into the room when she's in a room, stand by the door, and say something in a regular voice, and see if she responds. And then if she doesn't, go a little closer. And whenever she responds, come back to me and tell me how far away you were from her when she heard you. So he goes home, he stands by the door, she's washing the dishes, and he says, honey, I love you. No response. So he goes a little closer. Honey, I love you. No response. So he goes closer, he's almost touching her. And he says, honey, I love you. And she turns around and says, for the third time, I love you too. So marriage has two dimensions. Marriage has two dimensions. It has the observable body based relationship between a husband and wife. That's the physical bond. But then there's also the unobservable but real and genuine soul connection that exists between a husband and wife. Now, we learned last week that every person has a unique place within the 10 Sefirot that their soul comes from, that becomes their focus in life, and no two people are the same, right? Because there's infinite combinations of the 10, right? If 7 notes and 3 colors can make infinite colors and music, so 10 Sefirot can make an infinite amount of souls. Each soul is unique. So if my soul is truly rooted in a different place than my wife's soul, how in the world can we come together to become one? And the question isn't just how can we live together? Living together is not that big a deal, but we're trying to become one, to create a child that's a combination, that's one, that comes from the two of us. How can we truly unite into one if we are truly two? This is really the true joy of a wedding. The true joy of a wedding is that you're taking two and making them one. There's nothing more joyous. This is true peace. No one in the world wouldn't be overjoyed by true peace. True peace means when you have two opposites that actually become one, not just that can live on two sides of the border peacefully and not kill each other, but that truly become, that's a cause for joy. But how can that be? How can you accomplish it? And this question becomes, and again, this is not just body, not just a physical question, it's a spiritual question. How can two souls become one? Now, it is true, sometimes you'll hear it said that marriage, that a husband and wife really are two halves of one soul that were split when they were born, right? It's not so simple. In many places, it seems like God brings two souls together before they're born and then separates them, and then we bring them back together. So notice, it's not one soul that's cut in half. It's two souls that God brings together, and then when they come down here, they come, but so God does bring them together into one. So technically it is one soul, but it's one soul that's made up of two souls. The question is, how does he make one soul out of two souls? This is what it means. Hashem makes peace in the heavens, and we're asking him to make peace down here as well, to bring, so this is a real question. How can we do this? How can the kids playing in daycare together, the girl goes over to the boy and asks if he wants to play house. Sure. So the boy asks the girl, so what do you want me to be? What do you want me to do? So she says, I want you to share your feelings with me. And she's like, what is that? How do I do that? So she says, perfect, you'll be the husband. So we are truly opposites. How can we connect? So let's look at text 8. And we already know the solution because you've been coming, this is your 3rd week coming to Kabbalah class. We already know the solution. Let's look. The bride and groom are opposites. To unite as one, they require an infusion of higher energy that shines from a degree of divinity that transcends their differences. Like the king to bring 2 ministers together. Like the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, to bring the 10 Sefirot together. You need something much greater to bring them together. This is the significance of leading the bride and groom under a chuppah that hovers above both of them equally and is positioned at a height above them. It corresponds to the encompassing light of Sovev Kol Almin. So why do we have a chuppah? To represent God that's part of this relationship. And when the bride and groom go into that canopy and are aware of this overarching godly light that surrounds them, it's truly infinite. Then they don't lose their self-identity. They lose their independence, and they become submitted, that them as a man and as a woman can become one. Because now we're working for a higher purpose. Now we're working towards a higher goal, and that higher goal doesn't see us as being contradicting to each other. This is one of the reasons you'll see on the page 86 and 87, there are a few things, but two interesting things are that you'll notice in a chuppah, the bride circles the groom 7 times, right? That's the bride giving her sovev, her existence to the groom, and the groom gives a ring to the bride, also something that surrounds, that's circular. There are other circular things at a wedding, but you'll read more about that on that page. But this is how you bring two things together, by uncovering something that's higher than both of them. And this is why we observe Or Ein Sof in a marriage. If you take an object, okay? Let's say you make a flute. Yeah, you made a flute. What's a person that makes a flute? No, makes a flute. A metalworker. I don't know what a flute's made of. You make a flute, and by the way, this is where we'll see infinity in our own lives. Because remember, we mirror the image of God. So if God has infinity, we also have to have infinity. Where do we find infinity within ourselves? That's in marriage. Let's take a flute. So you create a flute. What happens after many years? After a while, you don't take care of it. The flute can start degrading. And then what happens then? You have to melt it down, and you can either make another flute, you can create something else, but that original flute doesn't exist anymore. In other words, there is no enduring continuity in a creation, something that I create, something that I make. However, when you're talking about a human being, so human beings can create a child. What happens to that child? They grow up. What happens then? Hopefully, they get married. And what happens then? They create new life. And this is absolutely, it has the vibes of infinity, because this can go on forever. Now, it's true that you find this in the animal life and in the plant life as well. And Kabbalah explains, because it says the end is in the beginning and the beginning is in the end. Because when you set out for a project, where does your initial thought process reveal itself? Only at the end of the project. All those steps in the middle, although they're part of the process, that's not the culmination of the beginning. So the beginning is the human. This is why God created the world. That's why we were created the last. We were created the last because we're the initial thought process. What did God create at the beginning? Inanimate, right? First he created the world, heavens and earth. Then he created the vegetative, then the animal life. So the vegetative is a seed. You put a seed out here, put it there forever, nothing's going to happen to it. When does the seed grow? When you put it in the ground. Because it's only in the end that the beginning is revealed. So God put in the ability of infinity into the human and also into the ground. Put a seed into the ground, and it'll also produce a tree that has seeds, that can produce trees that have seeds, etc. Where do animals get their sustenance from? Plants. So they also have this, they ingest this divine infinite ability to create, that creates infinite. But this is the idea of infinity, the way it presents itself within the person. In marriage, you see this, where you can create, and that potential of future creation exists forever. Now, if we know this truly, we could solve any conflict that arises in marriage. Anytime you have a conflict in marriage, why do you have a conflict? Because something about me bothers you, or something about you is bothering me. In other words, it's because of our differences. But if we keep in mind, if we were able to understand what marriage is all about, what the purpose is all about, and we uncovered God within our lives, we would be subsumed by the infinite light, and then our differences would fall apart. You know, the couple that was celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. So there was a guy there, and he goes over to the husband and he says, David, tell me the secret of your marriage. So David says, you know, in marriage, the word marriage doesn't have the letter I. And if you take I out of marriage and nothing's about me, it's about my spouse, you'll never have a problem. Okay, sounds good. So he goes to the wife and he says, Sarah, what's your secret to 50 years of marriage? She says, I never correct his spelling. So the more we embrace our differences, our personality, the more we stick to our guns. This is the way I am. Don't try to change me. The more problems we'll have in marriage. But the more we can uncover a deeper reality that sort of blinds the differences, and we can rise above the differences, not by destroying the differences. Remember, God wants, you need a defense minister and a finance minister. We're not trying to get rid of their titles. We're trying to uncover within them a deeper reality that will allow them to outgrow their personal limitations that are created because of who they are, and allow them to see the bigger picture. And this is the deeper meaning of Oseh Shalom. Yeah. This is what it means when we say Oseh Shalom. So the verse is, he who makes peace in his heavens should make peace for us. It's a prayer. Please, God, make peace for us down here. But the way we're explaining it now is that we can choose to allow God to make peace for us. By allowing God in our lives, we can allow God to make peace for us too. But we have to be open to that. We have to be open to seeing the infinite light. As long as we look at the mimalei kol, at the finite light of God, the way God is within creation, we deprive ourselves of the ability to grow out of our own limitations. Okay. I want to address now another element of infinity in our lives. Okay, so we did one element of infinity in our lives, creation. The fact that we can, but in our own souls, let's say you're not married, let's say you don't have kids, you can't have kids, or you already have it, your children are grown up, and you want to find this infinite ability in your own life. Where else do we see it in the person? So if you look in your maps, you'll see, I'll put it up on the screen as well. In lesson 1, we learned about action, speech, and thought. Yeah, these are the garments, soul garments. In lesson 2, we spoke about the soul powers, yeah, which generally are divided into intellect and emotion. Today, we're going to go up a level and see what lies at the core that corresponds to Keter, to infinite light. And that is, now, if you were a philosopher and I said there was something deeper than intellect, you probably wouldn't like me. But I can prove to you there's something deeper than intellect. Actually, it's not my proof. The Alter Rebbe explains this. How do you know there's something deeper than intellect? Because you see, a child matures. They can grow out of an intellectual idea, grow into another one. There must be something that's growing out of one and into another. What is that thing? That's a deeper part within the person. What is this deeper part than the soul powers? What is deeper than the soul powers? So, text 9 from the Alter Rebbe, the soul itself is a simple, undefined light that transcends the division of intellect and emotion. Now, where do you see this? Where do you access this deeper element? This is ratzon. Ratzon means desire. We're soon going to explain exactly what type of desire. But if you look closely, the Hebrew word ratzon, resh, tzadik, vav, nun, are the same letters as the word tzinor. Does anyone know what the word tzinor means? It means a pipe, pipeline, or a conduit. Okay, so you have two Hebrew words, ratzon and tzinor. What's ratzon? Ratzon is a pipeline that conveys the soul itself, the human desire, into the intellect and emotions.
Is that in relation to the Keter, Bina, Chachma?
No, this is Keter. If you look in on the right side, you'll see desire and pleasure. Okay. We're not going to talk too much about pleasure. Today we're talking about more desire, although it stems from pleasure, as we'll soon see. Let's look at text 11. We're going to talk about two types of desires. One type of human desire is referred to as a born desire because it is brought into being at a particular time. Okay, so it's born. It wasn't there, and now it is. It is also referred to as the lower desire because its position is beneath that of the intellect. We're going to give examples. Such a desire takes shape only after we strongly contemplate a particular matter. Without this, we will not experience any desire towards that matter. By contrast, when we think deeply about it, whether it's a specific food, an item of clothing, a financial issue, a lucrative business deal, etc., then a desire for that thing is born within us. So, when you look at the leaves, there is no human being that has a natural desire to eat leaves. Today, a lot of people like eating leaves. Why? Not because they have a natural desire to it, but because they use their intellect to understand the benefits those leaves may give to them medically. And therefore, now, I'm not saying it doesn't taste good, but no human being in history ever just wanted to go out and eat leaves. Most. I can't say there's not. I can't say there hasn't been a human being, but this type of desire is also called a midah, which means measured or limited. Midah means attribute. And midah also means a measure, a scale, measured or limited. For a desire born from intellectual knowledge and contemplation is a measured desire, limited to the specific rationalization that created it, right? My desire for greens is only as strong as I understand its health benefits to me. Consequently, when the logical basis for this desire ceases or becomes irrelevant, the desire towards that matter will similarly disappear. Let's say I can get a pill that gives me all the benefits of leaves, and I'm into taking supplements, and I take it. Now I have zero desire to eat kale. Let's say one day the scientists uncover terrible things that come from eating greens. I'm not going to want to eat it anymore because the desire was based on the intellect. So it's beneath it. It's the lower level desire. It's shaped by the intellect. Once the intellect changes, the desire changes. There is, however, now this type of desire obviously isn't the desire we're looking for, right? Because we're looking for something that's above intellect. There is, however, a second type of desire referred to as a higher desire. This desire is limitless. It is a simple desire that transcends intellect and is not born from it. Instead, it is a natural desire that relates to our very selves. For example, a father's love for the offspring that are an extension of his essence, and a mother's compassion for the child that she bore. These are natural desires that entirely transcend intellect and reason. So much so that if intellect tells you, kick the kid out of the house, most parents have a very hard time doing it, even if they know intellectually that it might be the right thing to do. But this is a desire that's supersedes. It's natural. It's instinctive. You're born with it. It's not something you create. Not only it's something that creates your intellect. You will now start thinking like your desire. The desire to live. We will do crazy things to live, things that defy logic. The desire to live isn't one. This desire we're going to call an innate desire. Intellectual activities play no role in this desire. Not only that, this desire influences intellect. I don't know if you remember the story. We discussed it in at least 2 of the JLI courses. There was a great sage talking about the verse says that bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. And there's the story in the Talmud, Rabbi Yishmael, he had an orchard, and there was he had a sharecropper that harvested the orchard, and every Friday, as part of the agreement, the sharecropper would bring a basket of fruit to Rabbi Yishmael. One week, the sharecropper comes to the rabbi's house on Thursday. So the rabbi asked the sharecropper, "Why are you bringing it Thursday?" So he said, "I had to be in town today anyway because I have a court case in your court. So I figured instead of coming again tomorrow, I'll just come today." The rabbi says, "I'm sorry, I have to recuse myself." Okay, very good. I just noticed that. Okay. He has to recuse himself. Why does he have to recuse himself? It's his fruit. He would have brought it, the guy would have brought it anyway earlier. And the court case had nothing to do with the sharecropping. It had to do with something else in his life. There was zero connection between the two. The next day, Rabbi Yishmael is in court. He's not presiding because he had to recuse himself, but he's sitting in court. And as the case is going on, he's finding himself thinking of all the things that the sharecropper could bring up for his defense. And so he shared the story with his students after the fact to describe, to explain, to show them how skewed his mind was. Again, he didn't get anything to influence he got nothing. He got what was owed to him, that he would have gotten it, not owed to him, it was his. He would have gotten it a day later. Nothing. And he sees this. So desire can actually sway intellect. Another thing that we see is that it's constant. The desire never stops. The desire to love your kids doesn't stop. You may not feel it at all times if you're not thinking about them, or if they're making trouble and you have to discipline in other ways. You may not be conscious of it, but it's constant. It never changes. The desire for kale isn't constant, and for greens isn't constant, because it's a desire that's born, it's a created desire. The desire that's innate is constant, and therefore it's infinity-like. This desire rises above intellect. It defies all intellect. This is an innate desire. However, there is a second class of desire, and that is the lower level of desire. The desire, right? The desire that's born from intellect. It's calculated. It's a calculated desire, right? We want to attend a specific university because the professors there are very good. What happens when you find out that there are better professors in a different university? Kids change what they want to be when they grow up, or what they want to do. Even in college, they change. Why? Because they start one field that they thought they wanted. They see how hard it is, or they see how ineffective it'll be in their lives, and they switch. In other words, as the intellect changes, the desire changes. It's desire. They're going to do many things to get to this place, but it's a lower desire. It's calculated. However, it's still called desire. It's still called ratzon. And it's not because we didn't have enough words in Hebrew to describe the different types of desires. We don't say one is desire and one is lust, or we call them both ratzon. They're both called desire. Just one is lower and one is higher. In other words, even though it seems like the lower desire is influenced by intellect, therefore it's below, really, it's also part of the middle column that's infinity-like. That's infinity. Why? Where do we see it? So I want to read to you in text 12 a story about desire. Rabbi Shimon and his colleague Levi were studying the Torah portion with Rabbi Shimon's father. Rabbi Shimon's father was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, the author of the Mishnah. When they completed the Torah portion, there was still time to study. So Levi suggested, let them bring us Proverbs to study. Whereas Rabbi Shimon suggested, let them bring us Psalms to study. Rabbi Shimon prevailed upon Levi to acquiesce, and they brought a book of Psalms. Now remember, they brought a book of Psalms, but Levi wants to study Proverbs. When they reached the passage in Psalm 1, which is the very first verse of the Psalm, the very first passage, praised is the person whose desire is in God's Torah. Rabbi Yehuda explained, what does that mean? You can only learn the Torah from a place that your heart desires. At this point, Levi declared, my teacher, you have given me permission to leave. He was there because Shimon wanted to learn Psalms. He didn't want to. And the teacher basically said, the only way you're going to be able to study Torah is if you study where your heart desires. His heart wasn't desiring Psalms. So he tells the teacher, you gave me permission to leave. Why is it, if you have two students that come to class, one is intellectually smarter than the other, but the particular subject that they're coming to study is very disinteresting to the smarter kid, and the not as smart kid is very interested in the subject. Who is more likely to come out better educated in the subject at the end of class? The one who's interested.
Studious.
I'm sorry?
The one who wants to study it, yeah. Studious.
Very good. Why is it? Why is that?
Because they take the time to learn subject matter, the knowledge, and absorb it.
Because the desire influences their brain. So if I'm disinterested, my brain isn't going to be active. It's not going to be using all its potential because I'm not interested. Whereas if I'm interested, then there's nothing to, you can have someone who you would never think can come up with ideas that when they're pushed against the wall in a courtroom, they're going to think of things that a professor wouldn't come up with. Why? Because it's their life on the line or their money on the line. Something is on the line. When you're pushed against the wall and you have a strong desire to protect yourself, then you can uncover things that otherwise wouldn't be accessible. So what do we have from here? What we have from here is even though the innate desire controls intellect, whereas the desire that's controlled by intellect, whereas the lower desire is controlled by intellect, is shaped by intellect. But at the end of the day, in other words, the kid that wants to study, that has a desire to study a specific subject, is it because they already know the subject that they have a desire? No. Otherwise, why would they be going to school for it? Why would they be studying? In other words, they want to know the subject. It's not an innate desire. It's not a natural desire because this desire could change tomorrow when they realize the subject is not beneficial for them. So it's not a natural desire. It's a desire that comes from intellect. Now, as they realize, it might be a good idea to get a degree in this field. I'm going to go to school. So they have a desire to excel in this subject, and that actually helps them excel in the subject, even though it's a desire that's controlled by intellect. So it's not a desire that's strong enough to control intellect to the extent that it shapes intellect based on its desire. But it's still a desire. And therefore, it's still in the middle column of the infinite. Yeah? Does that make sense? Trying to think if there's another. There was a guy, he went to the doctor. He's unable to do the things around the house that he used to be able to do. And he wants to know what his problem is. Is he losing his muscles? What exactly is going on? So the doctor says, I need to do some exams, some blood work, we'll see. After the exams are done, the guy turns to the doctor and he says, tell me in plain English, what's the problem? So the doctor says, in plain English, you're lazy. So he says, now tell me in medical terms so I can tell my wife. Many times you'll encounter either yourself, a child, a spouse that will say, I can't do this. It's too hard. What's your reaction when someone says, I can't do it? Try. Are you implying they didn't try? Or you saying you mean try harder? Try harder. Okay. That's a valid response. Huh? So what? In other words, what's meaningless? The fact that you tried and didn't succeed yet? Okay. We're going to get to that in a second, huh? So what? In other words, so you're frustrated. But does that mean you should continue trying it or try something else? You're onto something, but we have to develop that thought. And what are you going to do about it? Okay, so many people, especially today, will in today's pop psychology, they'll say, you know what? So you didn't do this. You're still a good, you're still a good person. You still accomplished a lot. So you couldn't figure this out. Some people might say, you know what? Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe try something else. And by the way, in some things, these are correct responses. There are certain things you shouldn't be doing. The guy says, I want to climb Mount Everest. Or the 80-year-old that wants to climb and fix it, change his light bulb on his own. You're trying, you can't find your balance. Don't do it. This isn't for you. Hire someone to do it. Yeah? So some things you shouldn't be doing. But there are many things that the reason you're not succeeding isn't because you're not trying, necessarily, but because you don't want it strong enough. You don't want it strong enough to try hard enough. It's used to try harder, but try harder is conditional, right? If I want to fast and not feel hungry, trying harder isn't going to help me, right? If I'm trying to gain weight or to gain muscle without exercising, so what isn't going to help me, right? The question is, do you really want to do this? If you really want to do this, then you will try harder. You don't have to be told to try harder. You will work harder if you really want to do this. In other words, you can artificially desire something, and that artificial desire will make you work harder, will cause your intellect to work harder and expand and do things that someone that's smarter than you can't accomplish because they don't want to. So although this type of desire is born in a lower level because there's a reason why you want to create this desire, but again, you are artificial because, and it's the lower desire, but you see within the lower desire an infinity-like property that you can propel yourself much higher by creating a desire. So when someone says, when next time someone tells you, I tried and I can't figure out how to do it. So the answer isn't try harder. The question is, do you want it hard enough? If you do, want it harder, desire harder. And if you really want to, you could. This is a story that I've shared many times. In text, I'll repeat it in orally. The Baal Shem Tov was once sitting with his disciples and they were studying. And a non-Jewish wagon driver passed by, and his horse and wagon got stuck in the mud. And he peeked his head into the window, saying, "Can you guys help me get my horse out of the mud?" So the student said, in Ukrainian, that type of Ukrainian, "Nie możesz, we can't." So the non-Jewish wagon driver said, "Możesz da, you can. Nie хочешь, you don't want to." There are two versions of the story. One version of the story is that they went out and they were able to get the wagon out. Another version of the story doesn't have an end. We don't know what they did. But the point is that this non-Jewish wagon, and the Baal Shem Tov went on to teach his students everything. Baal Shem Tov's main idea was that that everything is by divine providence, and the fact that you heard something means it's something you have to learn in your own personal life. Even though it was a non-Jewish wagon driver that shared something in the middle of a Torah class, there's a reason they heard it. Yeah, that there's a reason they heard it in order to understand that whatever you want to do, if you want it hard enough, and it's realistic, it's within your control, you can do it. If you want to be 6 foot and you're 5 foot, you can't do that, right? But if it's within your control, if you want it hard enough, you can accomplish it. Today we already know that in the brain, right? It's a field called neuroplasticity. Yeah, that the brain is plastic. It's not static. You can literally grow and change based, and a lot of it has to do with what you want to accomplish. So, in lesson 1, we discussed how we can control our garments. In lesson 2, we discussed how we can use the strong points of our soul to serve God, also to focus on the weak parts of the soul, but mainly to harness the strong parts of the soul to serve God. How can we sort of control ourselves when we don't want to? How can we, not when we're not in the mood? How can we harness our potential and overcome the difficulties? How can we do that? Desire. It all starts with desire. If you want to be the person you can be, you have to tap into the infinite. Desire is the representative of infinite in your life. We try the song. We'll see soon. Okay, question is, what happens if we don't want to? Can we create a desire? Yeah. So you want to go to study a subject, you have to want to go. You want to harness your thought, speech, and action to do mitzvahs, you have to want to do that. What if I don't want to? Can I create a desire? Create a desire, not strengthen a desire, harness it. Can I create a desire? I couldn't care less about my health. I'm 18. I don't care about my health. Is there a way for me to start caring about my health without having a a death scare, without is there a way to create intellectually or in my own self, is there a way to create a desire? So this, now we're going to go back to the beginning, to the first three. Chachma, Bina, and Da'at. Chachma, on page 100, you have the three. We will put them on the screen as well. But the word Chachma, if you divide it into two, is made up of two words, Hebrew words, koach ma, which means the power of what? Or what is this? What type of power are we talking about? This is known as sort of like the seed of wisdom. You're working on a problem, suddenly there's a lightning flash in your mind. You know what the solution to the problem is. You don't know yet exactly how it's a solution, but you've caught on to the light, to the spark. This is like a seed, right? The seed has nothing, but the seed has a lot of potential. But the seed itself, you don't see an apple when you look at a seed. That's a seed. This is chachma, wisdom. In other words, the pieces of information, almost. It's the ideas. But then we have bina. Bina means to understand, to comprehend. That's like the earth. You put the seed in the earth takes apart the chachma. It examines it from all sides. What happens to the seed in the earth? First, it rots away. It becomes exposed. Every inch of it, well, not inch, every millimeter, whatever it is, every particle becomes exposed. It's broken down to its smallest details. Now you have a complete picture. Now you can grow a tree, and now you see an apple. But at this point, it's still an idea. It's separate from you. Then comes das. Before I speak about what das is, I want to introduce it with a story. One of the stories that I was introduced to das with, and that is dat, chachma bina dat. The acronym is Chabad. Yeah. There was in 18th century, even maybe early 19th century and before, in Eastern Europe, there were many Jews that lived in farmlands in small villages where they didn't have rabbis and schools. So many times you'd have villagers that would hire a malamed. Malamed means a teacher. Someone would come live with you for 6 months 6 months at a time, and they would teach your kids. Now, this teacher served as two purposes. One, to teach the kids, and to teach the community, to sort of be like a traveling rabbi to a certain degree. But they would also be the literacy for the villagers. These villagers didn't know how to read and write. So anytime they got a letter, the malamed would read the letter. Anytime they had to write a letter, the malamed would write the letter. So the story goes that there was once a letter that came to a certain villager, and the letter informed the villager of the death of his father. He couldn't read it, so he gives it to the malamed to read. The malamed reads the letter, and when he gets to the line that tells the villager of the death of his father, the villager faints. The child is standing there, and he doesn't understand. The malamed, who understood the letter before he even said it, who actually read the words, didn't faint. And the villager who only heard the words, the villager faints. That doesn't make sense. The malamed should have fainted as soon as he read the words. What's the answer? It wasn't his father. And this is where das comes in. Das means it's mine. There's a relationship between it and me. Now, usually das is translated as knowledge. Now, usually knowledge means information. However, knowledge also means, das also means connection. As you look in the text 16a, das consists of a familiar connection that triggers desire. Thus, the Torah uses the term das to depict a bond, as in the verse, Adam knew Eve. What does that describe? That describes physical intimacy. In other words, das, that says Adam knew Eve and they had kids. Das means you make it yours. So Chabad is intellect, sure, but intellect without the intellectual idea influencing me and shaping me is Chachma and Bina. There's no Das. Das is when I take the idea and I make it change me, affect me. There is an exercise which you don't have time for. You can do it yourself at home on page 102. I think it can be fascinating if you close your eyes or played a little Hasidic melody, a nigun, and you tried meditating these ideas. You will find it amazing. But what do we have from here? I can use my intellect to create a desire. Let's say I have no interest in living a Jewish lifestyle. Or the other extreme, I have no interest in going to college. I have no interest in getting a job. I have no interest in getting married. I have no interest. Now, some of these, like getting married, that you have an innate desire for. You may be a little immature for that now. Unfortunately, that maturity may develop when you're 60 years old. It might be too late. But that's why we use Chabad. That's why we want to create. We want to uncover the desire now. So we use Chabad. We start with information. Go read up on why it's important. Then dissect it and see, is it real? Is it true? Is it for me? Take it apart and see if it works. And if it does, now try to envision your life with it or without it. Try to envision other people's lives with or without it. Which person would you rather be around? Which person do you want to be? And you will see you can create a desire from nothing if you employ your mind, your intellect. So, we are at a Kabbalah class, and therefore we can't just leave it in the air, in the ether. We discussed last week that the neshama is tahorahi, right? It's pure. Baras, God created, formed, and did. That's biyah. But tahorahi means in its essence, it's pure. How do you get there? Say, I don't feel connected to my Jewish life on a daily basis, but I want to. How do I get there? So we start. Chachma, the information is there. Open the Torah, the information is there. But it's not enough for it to be there. You have to contemplate it. You have to use Bina. Then you have to figure out, how am I going to contemplate about this in a personal way? Think of my life with it or without it. Think of the people I know with or without this specific value, this specific mitzvah. Is the person better with it or without it? This creates a calculated desire, because again, it's coming from intellect. But you will notice in a short time that really it's uncovering a desire that was always there. Because the soul has an innate desire. Unfortunately, it sleeps sometimes. We don't feel it. Just like the desire for kids isn't always there. A person, when they're young, they don't have the innate desire to have children and get married. People don't always feel their innate desires. But then when they start thinking about it, they uncover what was always there. How do you know it was always there? When it acts irrationally. When it does things that rationality wouldn't. Getting married to someone from the opposite. I mean, that's irrational, right? It doesn't fit. But it's an innate desire, and therefore we will do something irrational. But how did we get there? From the lower level of desire. And this can cause a person to invest in his relationship with God, not just in the Memale Kolam and the God that's present in the world, that's felt, because the God that surrounds the world is also present, but not in a way that's fills the world, not in a way that I can see it. I have to understand that it's there. But that will create a desire within me to want to have a relationship with the infinite. And it comes from the infinite within me. When my desire is infinite. Okay, we covered a lot today. But our current desire is to continue the journey of this course. And this desire is going to bring us back next week, hopefully, and propel ourselves one level deeper. I mentioned earlier that next week we will discuss a little bit about the mysterious world of Tohu, the shattering of the vessels. There's a world before not just world, we have 4 worlds, but there's a whole other universe before our universe. Our universe is here to fix a different universe, and that's the world of Tohu, and that we will uncover a little bit next week. I forgot to mention this in previous classes, but I think some of you are familiar with it. You should have a bookmarker somewhere in your books as well. If you go to myjli.com/Kabbalah, you will see the PowerPoint. Also the videos that unfortunately, this course, I'm not having a chance to show the videos. The videos are more summary videos, so I don't feel it's adding a lot. It's important to have the summary videos, which is why they put it, but there's just not enough time. So you can watch it there, as well as many other videos and additional readings. There will also be links in the email that hopefully will go out tomorrow with a recording of the class and links for further study. Let me